Farmers, trust is everything. At Genesis Fertilizers, we're not just proposing to build a facility, we're building a future designed for you. With real progress already underway, we're closer to providing Western Canadian farmers with a reliable, locally produced fertilizer supply. Now is the time to take control of your farm's future. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
Good day, and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, December the 11th. On this episode of The Word, don't Wheat Pete, we can mess up once in a while. Then, so much cool stuff. I'm actually just going to have to link to some stuff and let you decide if you want to read it or listen to it or not. There's just so much cool stuff has happened. I need to talk about wheat, lots of stuff there as well. Then more on phosphorus. That has ignited a great discussion last week's episode. And finish up, I hope, with a little bit more on tillage, because some neat stuff there as well. Let's go! Yes! Don't Wheat Pete last episode. Wheat Pete said that the Southwest Ag Conference, SWAC, was December 7th and 8th. Well, first off, registration closed on Monday, December the 9th, so you can't register there anymore. But, of course, and I hope everyone realized that I made that error, SWAC is January 7th and 8th of 2025, not this December, that is for sure. But that reminds me that you can still register for the Ontario Ag Conference. If you wanted to go to Ridgetown to the SWAC conference, no, in-person is closed, but you can get all the sessions virtually by registering for the Ontario Ag Conference and the Midwestern Ag Conference, the Eastern Ontario Crop Conference. You can still register for in-person there, plus all sorts of other educational opportunities that are out there. The Grey Bruce Farmers Week, your local soil and crop associations, lots of agribusiness meetings going on. Man, I always tell urban people or rural non-farmers that the people in Ontario, that farmers in Ontario have the most opportunity for on-the-job training of probably any industry, and that they go out there and they learn new stuff and they are up to date. For goodness sakes, take advantage of all of those opportunities. Okay, next. You want to see a farm shop? Oh my, just blew me away. So Bern Tobin interviewed the Terpsters, Cadillac Farms. We'll link it in the post. If you get a chance, watch that video. That shop just absolutely makes me so envious. It is incredible, but very, very cool stuff. Next, on Agronomy Monday, Sean Haney and I talked about glyphosate again, and just about public perception and how that really is having a big impact on some farmers. We've talked about that somewhat on the Word before, but we will link Agronomy Monday if you want to get more of that. But there is one thing that I'm going to throw out there. So there is a new book by David Boulani called What a Farmer Wants You to Know About Food. We'll link the post there as well. And I don't know, I think to my brother Paisley, what an awesome Christmas gift that would make for our sister Alana, because Alana is just an incredibly smart woman, but she always pushes back a little bit about production agriculture. I haven't read the book, but I think that probably there's some great stuff in there. So have a look at that. I think that's really cool stuff as well. On the new technology front, Mark sending me a post about trying to inject dry poultry litter. And you think about, wow, one of the problems, of course, with manure applications, we put them on the surface with poultry manure. That free ammonia just blasts off as soon as you put it on the surface. Really tough to capture that. Lots of phosphorus issues. They're working on injecting dry poultry litter. They haven't got it figured out yet, but that's cool. Powdery mildew control with UVC. So you will hear me talk about UVB radiation, and that's what causes physiological fleck in wheat. Well, now they are using UVC, so it's still ultraviolet light. It's a little different wavelength. in hort crops, or they're working on developing this to control powdery mildew. Technology is just amazing. I love all of this stuff. On the downside, and this isn't technology, but on the downside, sugar beet acres in the province of Ontario may drop by as much as 50%. So we grow sugar beets in Kent County. They go to a processing plant in Michigan. And right now, the transportation costs are just getting horrendous. But the other part of the reason why they're looking at this is that Cercospora, a very bad disease in sugar beets, is really becoming resistant to so many of the fungicides that yields and sugar quality just haven't been what they want it to be. And so the sugar cooperative is looking to buy shareholders out and reduce the acreage of sugar beets here in Ontario. It's a real downside. On the other hand, you kind of wonder, so if the American government decides to put a tariff on anything produced outside of the United States, and our sugar beets are going to that sugar plant, I don't know. How does that work? I have no idea. I don't get involved in that, but it does make me shake my head. All right, I want to move on. I want to talk about wheat, because David Wheat, who is the agronomist for Eric Watson in New Zealand. Remember, Eric was the world record holder at 258.8 bushels per acre, and we're going to put the picture with the post of Eric Watson's current wheat crop. And David sent me, hey, Peter, here's Eric's wheat. You know, it's 100 plants per square meter. They have 8 tillers, so that's 800 heads per square meter. And his comment was, we think it's a bit thin. And actually, you look at the picture, and I picked out one where you can say, yeah, gosh, that is a bit thin. But if you are looking at the post, for goodness sakes, look at the uniformity of the heads, how tabletop it is. It's not that the tiller heads are small and down in the canopy, man. Every head is just big and gorgeous. And 800 heads per square meter, if they get 50 kernels per head and they have 50 grams per thousand kernel weight, that's a heck of a wheat crop. That's all I can say. On the wheat acres here in the province of Ontario, StatsCan released their report, and it makes me feel a little bit better than the Agricor numbers. Remember, I was disappointed with the Agricor numbers at only 1,060,000. StatsCan, 1,183,700 acres of wheat planted here in the province, almost as much as in 2021. So I believe it's the third highest acreage ever. The record is 2008 at 1,225,000. So yeah, we're 70,000 acres off that, something like that. But it's still a very big crop, which jives a little bit better with Wheat Pete thinking we were going to actually plant record acres here in the province of Ontario last fall. On the wheat front as well, Mark sending me a great Twitter picture tagging me in from a grower from New South Wales in Australia, and they were harvesting their hard white winter wheat crop. They send it to, generally speaking, for Asian noodles. Hard white wheat makes Asian noodles, but they started harvest. They had then 11 days of rain and 100 millimeters, 4 inches. And we all are going like, well, that's just pretty common. No, New South Wales and Australia, they are not used to rainfall at harvest. There was lots of complaints through their harvest period about that. But you look at the picture and you go from this vitreous, so it looks like glass. The kernels look like glass where they first started to harvest. It's just a gorgeous sample. 11 days later, after 4 inches of rain, 100 millimeters, and it just looks like pasty, soft, white winter wheat. It looks actually like 2 different crops. Now, fortunately enough for that particular grower, Man, he still made a 301 falling number, and their cutoff is 300. Ours would be 250, so it still made the grade. But if you look at which crop you'd rather put in the bin, man, there is no question which one. All right, I want to move on quickly. Donald just saying, hey, Peter, so you talk about the dry fall and the impact of the trees. You know, if I go back in time, one year was incredibly dry in the fall. We had just planted a plum tree on our lawn, and I watered that plum tree all fall to keep it alive. The next year, my lawn was just horrible everywhere except where I watered the plum tree, and there the lawn was awesome. So with the super dry fall, in the fall of 2024, does that mean that our grass hay crop in 2025 is going to be significantly reduced? And Donald, I think the answer is no. What's really interesting in grass production is if I'm a grass seed producer, if I'm going to grow that perennial grass for a seed crop, I want to add nitrogen in the fall to get as many stems, as many heads as possible. But then in the spring, don't put any nitrogen on because that'll just promote vegetative growth, not reproductive growth. I think this fall that we had enough moisture late in the season that we got probably enough stems. And I think the fall that you're talking about, we probably starved the grass crop for reserves in the crown. And then the next spring on your lawn, I doubt you put any nitrogen fertilizer on it. And so it started off slow because it didn't have good reserves in the root system, in the rhizomes, or in the crown. And it just suffered all spring. If we look at a grass hay crop here in the province of Ontario, I think that we have lots of opportunity next spring to get out there with nitrogen. We're not trying to make seed. We pound it with nitrogen. I really do think that the yields are probably okay. But it's an interesting thought process, so I do appreciate that from you. All right, I'm going to move on to phosphorus because man, lots of questions, lots of discussion about my phosphorus notes on the last episode of The Word. First, the caller who said, hey, Pete, don't wheat Pete, you screwed up. Yeah, you're right, I did. I talked about soil test phosphorus, and the phosphorus available, 20 parts per million is 40 pounds of phosphorus. And then I talked about the MAP fertilizer or any other phosphorus fertilizer source bringing phosphorus, and the fact that 100 pounds of MAP is 52 pounds of phosphorus. And the caller said, Pete, wait a minute. That soil test phosphorus is actual phosphorus. Your MAP phosphorus is P2O5, and you slipped the clutch there because you equated the two. They aren't equal. Man, good for you. You are 100% right. MAP, we call it 52 pounds of phosphorus, but the conversion factor is 2.29, whereas soil test phosphorus is actual phosphorus. You got to take that 52 and divide it by 2.29, and guess what? You get 23 pounds of actual P in that 100 pounds of MAP. So good catch there on that. The other questions that have come in, though, a lot of people still struggling a little bit, and I think we need to do an agronomist session on phosphorus and help walk people through. I'm not going to try on this episode of The Word, but several callers saying, okay, Peter, but wait a minute. Is there any other way to, you're talking about building soil phosphorus with MAP. Actually, I wasn't talking about building. I was talking about maintaining. There's quite a difference, and my discussion was, the 80 bushel wheat crop, 52 pounds of phosphorus comes off, replace it with 100 pounds of MAP. But if you're going to build, yes, you can build with MAP, but it isn't always about build. So lots of people saying, is there any other way that you can build that phosphorus soil bank? And the answer is absolutely. You can also maintain the phosphorus soil bank. So manure is a great phosphorus source for all the callers that ask that. You can use biofertilizer, and you can use other sources of phosphorus. It doesn't really matter how you maintain that. And to the caller who said, well, wait a minute, though, do I really need to maintain my phosphorus soil test? I have a neighbor that all of their phosphorus soil tests are over 50 parts per million. Do I need to maintain that? That particular grower's agronomist has taken all the phosphorus out of their program because they have so much manure and high phosphorus soil tests. So good for that agronomist. If I had no manure and I had a soil test phosphorus of 50, I would still apply a wee little bit with my wheat seed in the fall because wheat is highly responsive. But if the wheat crop took off 52 pounds, I would be putting on 20 or 25 pounds to get that little bit gain in uniformity, gain in winter survival, but still pulling that very high soil test phosphorus down over time. I would not replace everything. So there's this balance where we want to keep the soil test phosphorus in that sweet spot, kind of between 20 and 35. Once it's over 35, yeah, you can pull it back down into that 35 or under, and that's an environmental concern. If you're under 20, you have to build. If you're between 20 and 35, you want to maintain. So I hope that helps to, clear up that whole thought process. And that caller also said boron on corn, that it's just pretty common. And he said, I know what you're going to say. Why boron on corn? But people are doing it. Yeah, people are doing it. It doesn't make it right necessarily. We do not have much work that supports boron applications needed on corn here in the province of Ontario. Maybe on really sandy soils, that would be the one that might work. Sulphur as well. I talked about sulphur on Agronomy Monday. We've already linked that in the post. But James from Cache Bay listened to it, and he said, okay, Peter, really interesting that with sulphur, and I believe I've talked about this before on the word, but with sulphur on soybeans, we really only get the benefit if we plant soybeans early into cold soils. And of course, Sean is from Purdue, so that Indiana, and that means that that's a much warmer climate than James at Cache Bay. And James basically saying, what source of sulfur do I have to use? And I've heard that with cold climates, a bit of nitrogen also is a benefit. Would ammonium sulfate, dry AMS, ammonium sulfate, or even liquid ammonium sulfate, would that meet the needs of both a little nitrogen on those soybeans and the sulfur to help the nodulation? And the answer is, in Sean Castiel's work, James, the very best sulfur source was dry ammonium sulfate. It wasn't due to the nitrogen in that situation. Can you get a little boost in growth with nitrogen in cold climates? The answer is absolutely. Is it economic? The horse data would say probably not. But regardless, man, if you can get an increase in nodulation in an area like you are in where you haven't had a history of soybeans and you're planting into cold soils, I would definitely give that sulfur a try. The other thing I did talk about on Agronomy Monday a little bit was I'm starting to lean towards earlier and earlier application of sulfur on winter wheat. I don't have data to say that it absolutely works, but there is the trial from Brian at Hensel Co-op in Kent County that when they put, and this again was 2024 spring, when we had no winter, so that doesn't mean it'll work in 2025, but they put mez on their wheat in February. The wheat had greened up, it was growing, so please keep this in context, but they got 20 bushel per acre yield gain from the mez. And when they put the sulfur on in April, they couldn't match that 20 bushel yield gain. They still got, I think, 15 bushels or 14 bushels. It was still a very significant response to the sulfur, but it wasn't the 20 bushels of that early application. So it's a thought process, and give it a try, right? That's what we want to do. Every field should be a test plot. All right, I want to move on and finish up here quickly on tillage. So first, Dean saying, Peter, we get all bent out of shape about politics here and everything, and then we read the Senate's report on agriculture. Senator Rob Black, one of the hardest working senators, really behind that report, and Dean says should we not focus more on soil? And the answer is absolutely. So here's a couple of cool things about soil. First off, David Lobb, who is the father, if you will, of tillage erosion, has just finished up some studies going back to the old Tillage 2000 sites here in Ontario. And what's really scary and also interesting is that after 30 years of conservation tillage, we could not correct the effects of earlier tillage erosion. We still had a 10% yield loss. That is the number that on the two sites that they studied in detail. 10% yield loss due to tillage erosion. No-till or minimum till applied in those situations for that 30 or 30-plus year time frame. No improvement in yield whatsoever. So the only way to improve that yield is by building back the topsoil. And while conservation tillage or no-till may stop the tillage erosion, it does not rebuild the soil. So in order to do that, you actually have to move the topsoil back up, or you have to add copious amounts of manure or biofertilizer or some organic source to do that. So that was really, really instructional. Plus the fact that tillage erosion continues to be much greater on sloping soils, much greater concern than water or wind erosion. I have already talked about that, and we'll talk about it more in the future, I'm sure. But here's my last note from my great friend Woody on this whole thought process about residue and how does it work. Woody was walking his field, and he called me and he says, Peter, I have this observation, and this is just a couple of days ago. Really interesting. So Woody does no nitrogen, he does perennial ground cover, and he does added nitrogen. And he says, Peter, I was walking that field, and I looked over, and there's the residue just as bright. It's like all of a sudden it changes color. I walk there, and sure enough, there's the stake in the ground, no nitrogen. I walk to where I have perennial ground cover, white clover. That residue is not bright. I walk to where I added nitrogen. That residue is not bright. What is going on? Woody, it's a carbon to nitrogen ratio thing in the residue. Where you didn't apply nitrogen, we have a much higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, and the soil bugs can't work on that residue, so it is staying bright. It's the same as Dave Hooker's 50 pounds of nitrogen on the oat crop so that it has a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio and does not cause a yield decrease in the following corn crop. But what an observation, Woody, and what take pictures, send pictures to me, because that is just phenomenally interesting. And with that, once again, Wheat Pete has talked way too long. That's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. This is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, December the 11th. Hey, keep the questions, the comments, the feedback coming, and I'll talk way too long yet again next week. See you then.